Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating stack of declassified intelligence documents from early 1973. Imagine you're sitting there sifting through these old cables and reports, trying to piece together a pretty complex puzzle. That's basically what we're going to do right now.
Yeah, and it's really illuminating here is how these, seemingly dry government records, they aren't just historical footnotes, not at all. They really offer this vivid window into a specific dynamic moment in geopolitical history. You can see the intricate dance of intelligence gathering, these international political movements, and frankly, the profound challenges of just figuring out who was who during a very uncertain time.
Absolutely. So, our mission today really is to unpack these sources. We've got primarily two secret cables, one from January, one from February of 73, and we want to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge for you. We're going to zero in on the movements and the intel surrounding specific individuals, mostly American radicals, members of the Black Panther Party, operating over in East Africa. So, what's in this deep dive for you? Well, you'll get a kind of shortcut to understanding this complex web of surveillance, some unexpected international connections, and the very real pitfalls, like mistaken identities, that define this really fascinating era. Let's start peeling back the layers. Okay, so first off, we're looking at communications mainly between an intelligence station in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and their headquarters. Some info is also copied to Nairobi, in Kenya. And the overarching subject line for these messages is MHC ERB, RIBAT, MN, chaos. Now, RIBAT, that's a pretty common intelligence designator, right, for specific people or groups.
Right.
But MNCAOS, that code name, that seems far more telling.
Oh, indeed. MMCAAOS was the code name for a pretty significant FBI investigation, primarily looking into domestic radical groups, particularly the Black Panther Party, and what they perceived as their international connections during the Cold War. So seeing that code, MNCAAOS, it immediately tells us these documents aren't just, general observations. They're tied directly to a high-priority, sensitive effort. They're trying to understand and track these groups, especially what they were doing abroad, which naturally leads us to ask, what specific information were they prioritizing about these people?
Good question. And our first major thread in this intelligence tapestry leads us straight to Pete O'Neill. He's identified as a Black Panther Party leader. The documents get incredibly detailed about his living situation. A new apartment complex in South Dar es Salaam, specifically, the rear flat of Building to G. They even give approximate coordinates, 3843 on Y941, edition 3 AMS map Dar es Salaam South. I mean, map coordinates.
Yeah, that level of granularity is not just about showing, intensity of surveillance, though it is intense. It suggests something more, maybe a specific directive or perhaps a perceived threat level that warranted knowing exactly where these individuals were, almost with military precision. It could indicate concerns about maybe their operational capabilities or potential for clandestine meetings, perhaps. And O'Neill, he's noted as living there with his wife, Charlotte, also two unidentified BPP members. And this is significant. Two unidentified Chinese advisors. Now, think about it. In 1973, middle of the Cold War, seeing Chinese advisors mentioned, that would have immediately flagged huge geopolitical concerns.
Oh, absolutely.
It hints at the perceived influence of international powers in supporting these radical movements, which was, of course, a major intelligence priority for the U.S. back then. And the document even mentions O'Neill originally had flat #7 in BLHF adjacent to present residence, which just shows they were tracking him continuously.
Right. So while agents were meticulously documenting O'Neill's place, their focus wasn't just on stationary targets. These documents also reveal the constant movement of other key individuals. And a central figure in gathering a lot of this intel seems to be an operative identified only as OBOWL1. Draws. We learn OBOWL1 left Dar es Salaam for Nairobi on January 30th. It was a 9-day temporary duty trip, and the stated purpose was specifically to provide new data. Okay, and speaking of challenges while on the move, maybe one of the most intriguing twists in these cables involves another guy, John Manning, also under scrutiny. He tried to take a trip to Uganda, but, well, he couldn't complete it. He was actually stopped at Ugandan border by military guards, and they told him he'd need something called an unfall document to get in.
That mention of an unfall document, it's quite specific. It really points to a particular bureaucratic hurdle, maybe a security protocol in Uganda at that time, that Manning probably just didn't know about. It really highlights the complex and sometimes, let's say, opaque travel requirements people faced operating in these regions. And Manning's stated reason for the trip. He wanted to meet with the Ugandan president, Idi Amin, himself.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and establish some kind of economic liaison with Black Muslims in U.S. That's what the report says. His most recent attempt to contact Ugandan leader was apparently a letter sent January 22nd. In it, he recommended his friend Joseph Fatman Brown, supporting Brown's forthcoming residence request.
And here's where it gets a bit murky, right? There's a note saying it isn't clear whether this, meaning Manning getting stopped, is direct result of notification of Tanzanian authorities and Brown of revocation of Brown's U.S. passport several days earlier or some other reason. So it shows the intelligence agency themselves grappling with cause and effect. They didn't always have the full picture. Plus, this operative, OBOWO1, was trying to get information on Ugandan contacts within the Dar MNC AOS community, as they called it. And the report explicitly notes no indication any connection with PLO. So the agency was also actively trying to rule out certain links, like with the Palestine Liberation Organization.
Which was another major concern at the time, linking various international groups.
Right. But the challenges weren't just navigating bureaucracy or ruling out connections. Sometimes the biggest hurdle was, well, basic identification. And this is shown in this really remarkable mix-up involving a man named George Rice, who also went by George Matthews. He was released by Tanzanian authorities several weeks ago, even though some group, identified as LNM, initially thought he was someone else entirely. The explanation given: Tanzanians had mistaken Rice for hijacker George Edward Wright just based on newspaper photos of Delta hijackers.
This is where the human element and maybe the fog of surveillance becomes just starkly apparent.
Yeah.
You know? And the real irony, the truly ironic part of this whole situation, is that the actual hijacker, George Edward Wright, who also used the name Larry Darnell Burgess, he was in Dar es Salaam at time of Rice detention.
No way.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Even with all their resources, the agencies could get completely tripped up by a simple newspaper photo. It's almost like something out of the spy novel, except, it was very real. And it had real consequences for George Rice, the wrong guy. It just highlights the inherent fallibility of intelligence work, the potential for really significant errors, even when you're dealing with high-stakes individuals.
And the response from headquarters kind of underscores that point. They appreciated getting the correct info. They stated this was actually the first indication that Wright, the real hijacker, had traveled outside Algiers. Their own records, their traces, showed the subject Wright, a.k.a. Burgess, had arrived Orly, France on 15 August 1970 from Algiers. So this new info from Dar was filling in critical gaps about the hijackers' movements after France.
A crucial piece of the puzzle found almost by accident through a case of mistaken identity.
Incredible. Okay, so OBOWL1, this operative, was clearly a very busy person. Beyond O'Neill's movements and the whole Manning situation in Uganda, the reports show that on January 24th, OBOWL1 contacted another individual, Roosevelt Brown. Brown had apparently come down from Nairobi, and Brown attempted to renew outdated excursion air ticket that same day. But you know how things go. By the time the renewal was approved, he'd already returned Nairobi 26 John.
Right, and these seemingly small movements, like trying to renew an old plane ticket, they were clearly of interest. Why? Because they represent operational minutia, little details that could potentially reveal broader patterns or maybe intentions down the line. OBLOL1 also spotted Lynn Prince Henry Evans, spotted him on the way to a rally protesting the assassination of PAIGC leader Amilcar Cabral.
Okay, PAIGC, remind us.
That's the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. And Cabral was a hugely significant figure in African anti-colonial movements. His assassination sent shockwaves across the continent. So Evans being at a rally protesting it, that would definitely be noteworthy to intelligence observers.
Makes sense. And Evans himself was described as currently being subject to an NVIDIA Regional Security Officer investigation. NVIDIA.
NVIDIA, in this context, it likely refers to some kind of internal system or process, probably for vetting individuals or dealing with security clearances within the intelligence community.
Yeah.
So him being under an NVIDIA RSO investigation suggests a more formalized, probably quite serious investigation into his activities was already underway.
Got it. And the details just keep coming, don't they? During visits to the Pan-African Skills Office, or PAS, OBOWL1 met two other individuals, Fred Brooks and Malik Chaka. They were apparently producing a statement from PAS denouncing Cabral assassination for a demonstration, political activity, and then OBOWL1 even forwarded initial technical survey. This included a floor plan and notes, which were being sent separately by dispatch, and then there's this detail, it's almost mundane. Exemplar electric outlets no longer obtainable locally, however, OBOWL1 believes he can get them in Nairobi, electric outlets.
Yeah, it seems mundane, but that specific, almost logistical detail about electrical outlets, sitting right alongside political statements and floor plans, it really showcases the truly comprehensive nature of the intelligence gathering. It wasn't just about high-level strategy or who's meeting whom. It was also about the meticulous operational logistics. Things like sourcing specific parts could make or break an intelligence operation, technically speaking. It really highlights the resourcefulness required of these operatives out in the field. They had to think
Yeah.
about everything.
Everything down to the wiring. Okay, finally, one more name mentioned in these cables. Curtis Powell. He was residing in the same area as Pete O'Neill, but not the same building, close by. And OBOWL1, along with John Manning, actually drove Powell to the airport on January 27th for a trip Powell was taking to Nairobi. And the report even notes that both Manning and Powell had to pay airport tax. Even airport tax payments become a data point.
Every little bit counts, apparently.
And headquarters also showed continued interest in stolen passports, specifically mentioning them in relation to NVIDIA, that internal security process again, and other reports. So stolen passports were clearly another angle they were tracking.
Yeah, suggesting concerns about false identities, clandestine travel.
hmm
It all fits into that broader picture of tracking these international movements.
So let's step back. What does all this mean for us, having really dived into these early 1973 cables? Well, this deep dive shows us an intelligence network operating with, frankly, remarkable granularity, meticulously tracking individuals, their movements, their connections, right down to apartment coordinates, who they live with, like those Chinese advisors, bureaucratic hurdles like the UNFL document, and even the cost of airport tax. It's a really powerful snapshot of a complex period where all these different political movements were intersecting with intense international surveillance efforts.
Yeah, these documents, they're not just dry records. They really reveal the high stakes of Cold War intelligence, a time when even seemingly minor travel plans or apartment details were scrutinized intensely, looking for signs of subversive networks. They illustrate that constant tension between gathering information and the operational realities on the ground. Everything from the painstaking detail of floor plans to that significant issue of mistaken identities, like the whole Rice-Wright-Burgess situation. It really underscores how seemingly small details can be part of a much, much larger interconnected intelligence picture. And it certainly challenges notions of privacy, demonstrating the global reach of these power struggles during that era.
So, what stands out to you, our listener, about this? Maybe the sheer level of detail, that blend of high stakes intelligence gathering and really mundane information like electric outlets and airport tax. Perhaps consider what the focus on these particular individuals and their activities back in 1973 tells us about the intelligence priorities of the Cold War era. And maybe think about how that might compare to the kinds of information intelligence agencies might prioritize in today's very different, very interconnected world. Something to mull over until our next deep dive.